Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Michelle Hayward with Positive Hire. Where we connect Black, Indigenous, and Latinx women who are experienced scientists, engineers, and technology professionals to management roles. Welcome to our series that we are calling the Equity Pursuit. Today, I have the pleasure of having Cynthia Zenti and Marie, because Marie's going to teach me how to say her name correctly one day. Communication is really important, right? So it's Gilmartin.
Oh
Did
yeah,
I
you
get
did pretty well. Gettle Gilmartin. Yeah,
okay? I,
nice
I,
job.
I've been practicing in my head, and I was like, but I need to verbalize it, right? And so this is important, and because I literally did it start as a joke because we're talking about inclusive communication, and one of the things that people often do is when somebody's name is not common to them, they'll make up something, they'll ignore it, or you in the yellow shirt or whatever. But it's really important. That's a really big thing about respecting people by saying their name. And so we're really talking about how inclusive communication should show up or is not showing up in a lot of the workplaces. And so I'm going to kick it over to Marie to talk to introduce herself so you can get more to know her better because she has a great story and history in communication as well.
Hi, everybody. My name is Marie Gettle Gilmartin, and I am the founder and principal of Fertile Ground Communications. I'm a writer and communications consultant, and I help companies avoid boring by translating technical, hard to understand, jargon filled language into engaging, story driven text. And I have had a passion for inclusive communications ever since I was in college. And I took feminist theology and I learned about my own faith, but it broadened beyond that. It made me into a feminist. And as a writer, I am always trying to stay up with the latest in inclusive language and inclusive communication. So I'm really excited about this topic.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for being here, Marie. Now, Cynthia, why don't you tell us about your background, your experience, because you both of you come out of Marie and I come out of very similar industries and work for competitors. And Cynthia is in a whole other industry, but encountered some of the same difficulties we have in our industry. So, Cynthia, love for you to share with the audience your background and experience.
Thank you, and hi, everybody. So my name is Cynthia Zenti. I am the founder and VP of Sales for Integrated Selling, and we help leaders prioritize authenticity, diversity and inclusion, and human well-being to increase employee engagement and performance. That's a mouthful. I have to practice that often. So it's what's interesting is that you both have technical backgrounds, right, or involved in that, but I have been in technical sales for a very long time now, 17 years, and having basically grown up in sales, um, inclusive language is something that is kind of foreign, and there's a lot of interesting communication that happens in sales. But also on a personal note, I have a son who is nonverbal and developmentally delayed. So for the last 22 years, I've been a very strong advocate for inclusive language and inclusive communication.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. We're going to get into that. So today, just for this conversation, um, found a definition that I thought we could utilize just so we have a framework. When we're talking about inclusive communication, we're talking about sharing information in a way that everyone can understand. And if you're in a room, you're in a workplace, and you're people that are hard of hearing or deaf, how do you then communicate with them? Is somebody going to sign? Do you have devices that they can read, but somebody's visually impaired or they're blind? So make sure you understanding the needs of the people you're communicating with is the first part of that. And so I want to go over to Cynthia because you're talking about your son who's nonverbal. And I know we're talking about the workplace, but he's older now, he's an adult age. But what are you seeing in his day-to-day life that people struggle with when it comes to inclusive communication?
Oh, this is a good one. And thank you for asking. Usually people do not talk to him. They will not look at him. They will talk to me and ask questions about him, thinking that he cannot answer. So they will naturally default to me. And they'll be like, does he want to do this? I'm like, well, he's standing right there. You should probably ask him. Because there's an assumption that because someone may not be able to talk in a way or communicate in a way that we're used to, there's an assumption made that they don't comprehend, which is such a fallacy. Like it's such a misnomer to think that. It's interesting because people don't know what to expect. So he has a very hybrid way of communicating because he also has low muscle tone. He can't use his fingers to sign, right? He can only do a couple of gestures at a time. But he has something called an augmentative communication program that he uses on his iPad. And basically you use picture symbols and you can build sentences, press the sentence, and it'll speak on your behalf. So, but people are not used to seeing that kind of communication, and they really may not know what to do with it. So rather than including him and encouraging him, creating a safe space for him to communicate, they just avoid him. So it's been interesting to see that, to witness this.
Thank you for sharing that. And you're seeing this in places that are saying, bring him here because we are an environment or a place that welcomes people that are that aren't, I hate that term, but differently abled is what I usually try to say.
Yeah. So there are places that do that. And so he has 2 placements out in the community. One is with a local organization that's sponsored through, I live in the province of British Columbia, and it's through Community Living BC. So they sponsor different agencies. One is called Community Ventures, and it is about, they have inclusive day programs for differently abled individuals. So it's really great. And they have their own in-house businesses. So they go there and they work, and they have support people who work and take them out into the community as well, which is great. He also works at a local grocery store, and he has one shift a week for 2 hours that he goes with a support person. And he does, product facing and things like that. But what's interesting is to see that there's not necessarily a lot of integration with the rest of the staff. He basically goes in, does his shift, and then leaves. And so it's amazing that they welcome them there, but there's still opportunity for the culture to embrace people who are differently abled.
Thank you for that. And so I thank you for bringing in the workplace, because as we're saying, we want to bring in differently abled people, understanding it's a small step. You have to go through a full process and iteration for every person, not even every type of disability, but every person. So organizations oftentimes will shrink back from it, but also training your staff, your employees, and encouraging your patrons and your customers and clients to engage with your employees. So you're differently able employees. And sometimes it's just like, just do these 1 or 2 things. Like, that's it. Like, I wish you would have told me that. And once they know how to do it, because oftentimes people are fearful of getting something wrong. And it's like, no, just do this. And that kind of gets them on that road. Go ahead, Cynthia.
No, I was just going to say that's such a good point. And really what I see is it's a loss, because the company is really trying to do something phenomenal, right? Like to make sure that, people do have a safe environment to go to, but the momentum almost gets lost. The effort almost gets lost in the fact, because then the employee, they don't have that sense of belonging. Right. And they lose momentum. They lose why do I even want to go there if I don't even have, if nobody even recognizes me? if I'm not making an impact. So taking that one extra step to train your staff on how to include or educate them on what the requirements are of that individual, how to interact with them, it really enhances the results that they get.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Marie, I want to go over to you and talk about instances where you've encountered communication that wasn't inclusive and what your experience was and things along that line.
Yeah, the incident that I always go back to in my mind where I wish I had stood up and I did not was I used to manage a multi-state group of publication staff, and this happened in our Seattle office. I was in the middle of all these employees who all reported to me, and one of the women made a comment about people gathered into a conference room, and she said they were crammed into a conference room like Vietnamese people on a boat or something like that. I can't remember exactly what she said, but it was racist. It was xenophobic. And I was often in those types of situations, I'm sort of taken aback when somebody says something like that. This was back in probably like the year 2000. And I didn't say anything. And I've always regretted not confronting that. And so ever since then, I've committed myself to standing up when I see somebody say something. A lot of times they don't really know about it. Like the other day, I was in another type of business meeting, and somebody used the term openly kimono, which is a racist and sexist term that stereotypes Asian women. So I sent an email to the person who said this, who was actually an Asian woman herself, and she was very receptive to it. She'd never, thought of this, and she'd been around, hanging out around, men in the tech industry so much. She was so used to it. So I think that it's really important when we see somebody say something that's racist, sexist, xenophobic, one of the isms, that we say something about it. And I've just really committed my business to educating people about how to be more inclusive because of that. I feel like it sort of was a wake-up call for me, many, many years ago. And so I've just kind of committed myself to when I learn about a particular phrase. Last month, I learned, this is how Michelle found me and suggested I come on this show. I discovered that Asian Americans do not use a hyphen when they call themselves Asian Americans. And I have a lot of connections to Asia. I lived in Japan for 3 years. I had never heard this before. So I wrote a blog post about it. And I just think it's important for us, especially as white people, to own up to when we make mistakes and share it with other people and say, yeah, okay, I didn't know about this. Just sharing it for the rest of you.
Yeah. So verbal, written communication being inclusive, and one of the biggest things I saw, because my background is engineering, was always guys.
Yes.
And it got to the point, I remember this, it was during the Great Recession. And I was in a conference room. This, everything's open, and, we were out and about pre-pandemic. And it's like, oh, and ladies, right? But the thing was, I was one of few women on that particular project, like let's say 5, literally, on my employer side. And so, but I was the only woman in the room. And so it was really interesting on how it was so common to say guys. And I'd be like, oh, great, I don't have to do any of that. And he was like, well, I said, you said guys, that didn't include me. And so after a while, since you're going to try to group me with other people, I excluded myself, especially with something I really didn't want to do. I said, well, y'all have fun doing that. And it's like, what you mean? I said, Bob said guys. I don't qualify. That is not where I am. And so it became, it's a running theme in technical spaces to often, and leadership as well, that obviously is not a woman that is going to do this. And I go back to this particular time. The last project I worked on before I left construction, I worked on the job site. I worked in the field, right? So on the construction site, this happened to be a laydown yard where we had our work trailer. And I was walking towards the front door of the work trailer. Yes, we have a front door. We have a back door. We might have side doors. Just follow me. But And a man walks in, and he goes, "I'm looking for the admin Michelle to get drawings." Well, number one, we didn't have any admins on site. Like, you were there, you might have been pushing some papers, but nobody was an admin. Number two, we definitely didn't have an engineer name. An admin named Michelle. So my response was, we don't have an admin named Michelle, but we have an engineer named Michelle. The look on the guy's face is like, oh shit, what do I do? Right? So he never apologized. He was like, well, I'm here to get drawings for X, Y, and Z. And I said, they're in my office this way. So I turn around, he follows me to my office, which has a door. It has 4 walls. Because, and I'm not saying it's bad to be an admin, but the assumption people make based on gender or a name that sounds feminine or belongs to a woman is very disheartening, because now you get like, well, you should, well, why don't you have the woman or the girl? And I've gotten this to order lunch.
Yeah, well, and probably in your case, it was also your race, because you talked about how you were the only, and he may have
This particular guy had never met me, and trust me, he never came back to that trailer, at least not when I was there.
He was scared.
Michelle, I've been in tech sales for the last 17 years, right? And the last 12 years embedded hardware. And I'm literally dealing with defense contractors, and we specialize in one particular role that I have, we specialize in embedded DC-DC power conversion. So I literally work with rocket scientists and defense contractors who are building like these crazy type of data acquisition units and things like that. People will phone, and because there's, it's a small organization, often I'll just answer the phone. I mean, why wouldn't I, right? I'm in sales. That's what I do. And they'll be asking questions like, oh no, put me through to your engineer, put me through to your support person, put me through to this, put me through, I need help with this. The assumption is because I answered the phone that I can't help them. Now, I don't know if that's because I'm a woman, or I also don't know if it's because they assume that people still have, someone else answering the phone. But even when I say, what is it? Let me help you. They'll still say, well, no, let me speak to, someone in support. There's 7 of us. You know what? There's a good chance any of us can help you. And half of us are women. So, well, actually, then there's 8 of us, because half of us are women. But yeah, it's interesting. I get that all the time, where they overtalk you. They're just like, you'll be mid-sentence and they'll just like start cutting you off. It's like, wait a minute.
Yes. Let's talk about that. The competency bias that we're seeing in meetings, and now in virtual spaces, because in meetings it was like, I know you always know who's going to cut you off, or who's going to cut people off in a meeting. And so what has been your experience, Cynthia, being in those spaces with that person
So I've seen it happen internally. And it's almost like being set up to fail, where you'll start talking about something, and then someone who has more experience will cut you off, when it's like, well, why didn't you just lead the conversation in the first place? Why would you have me start the conversation if you were going to come in and overtalk me? That makes no sense to me whatsoever. Or being in, say, like at trade shows, standing at a booth, and you're asking very relevant conversations, and then it's almost like you get dismissed. Oh, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. It'll do what it's supposed to do, when you start questioning how it works, because you're like, oh, that doesn't make sense to me. You says it does all this, but from what I know, it doesn't. But it's that dismissal of, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. It's a proverbial pat on the head. See ya.
Absolutely. Any thoughts for you, Marie?
Well, I read somewhere that in our online world right now, that women are getting cut off more than we ever were before on Zoom. So that's very discouraging. I mean, I'm not in the corporate world anymore, but I'm sure I would be experiencing that if I were still there. that's very sad. And I think that more men need to be aware of this tendency to cut women off. And also, we really need allies, male allies, who are going to say, Cynthia was in the middle of saying something. We desperately need those allies, or even they could be women, who step in and say, let's listen to what Cynthia had to say. She was in the middle of something. We need to support each other and help raise each other's voices up.
I want to bring up a comment before we move on. I think it's really important. I don't get cut off, but what happens frequently is that I will say something and a white male will repeat what I just said in another way, like it was something new.
Yeah.
And yeah. Unfortunately, I had a few meetings before this, and so I had a team of designers we were meeting with, and I said, so are y'all coming from your meeting before the meeting? And they started laughing, like, how did you know? It is a team of women. But often what I will say is, if you're working with other women, even if it's an admin, go have a meeting before the meeting about who is going to interject and say, you know what, Jeff? I absolutely love that idea when Cheryl said it.
I love that idea. Yeah.
And that way, and sometimes it's another man. And so I did really well towards the end of my career. I told people, if you get closer to 40, things change. And I would be like, yeah, Michelle said that, or such and such said that. I agree, it is a great idea. But you took away a couple core good parts of that we need to add back that she had in there. And so you could see some of the Gen Xers, tail end Gen Xers and early millennials changing the workplace and the dynamics and the discussions in those rooms. And so if you can find a partner in crime or a co-conspirator, as I like to say, definitely have a meeting before the meeting and figure out how you can position yourselves. And then one thing I would tell you to do on a Zoom is like, hello, can y'all hear me? Like, you're good, because I wasn't finished with my statement. So I didn't know if my internet dropped out. That's the reason why such and such started talking. So there are things you can say to continue to finish your thought. Like, so why don't you go ahead and pause, Jeff, while my internet continues to work, and so you can finish your statement. And so just find out who that is and what's going on in the conversation. So I would also do that so people can have their opportunity to be heard. The other thing was on a conference call years ago, and the VP got on, he was leading the call, and he's like, nobody's on here. He hangs up. And another guy goes, his hearing aid battery must be dead. Let me go call the admin. But most of us didn't know he wore a hearing aid because we were on a WebEx. And so he was like, I know what's going on, because he heard nobody. We called in from 5 different places, but the VP heard 0 people. And so it was understanding then that he was differently able. But had we not had that one person on there, we would have been like, he has a bad phone connection, but his hearing aid battery was dead, and it was. And so it's things like that we also need to be conscientious of. How our volume. Do we have a lot of background noise? Because I worked in construction, and so if somebody's coming in from the site, like, hey, you need to go get in your truck or move your vehicle so you don't have a background noise. So in that inclusiveness, we also have to be conscientious of what people need as well. When it comes to, if somebody's visually impaired, backlit, we might ask you to sit behind a wall as opposed to a window, even if it's well covered. And so really take into account what other people's needs are. And the one good thing I love about LinkedIn now is they actually give subtitles to automatically. They come up. You don't get to select, or if you forgot to turn them on, they automatically come up. And so I think we're seeing where places are being. It took LinkedIn Lives aren't new, but it took a while for us to finally get here in order. But hopefully it becomes a standard. And I think we need to take these best practices and build them in from the ground up and not come in later. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to go over to you, Marie, and see what have been any other experiences you've had in the workplace around inclusive communication.
Yeah, I just want to echo what you just said because I actually wear a hearing aid. I have had a hearing aid for about the last 5 or 6 years, and it's made me. My dad has pretty profound hearing loss, and I feel like it's made me more compassionate and understanding to what he's going through. Even though my hearing loss is not as strong as his, so that's a really important point. I'm thinking the other thing is that we need to look at all of our language in our written language and our spoken language around racist, sexist words that may not appear to be racist or sexist, but have racist or sexist origins. So some of the examples are, Michelle mentioned that there's a lot of use of slave and master in the tech industry, or take it out to the shed, or grandfather clause, or manning the booth is one of my least favorite phrases because it's usually a woman who's at the booth, not a man. So those are just a few examples that come to mind off the top of my head. And I think that it's also important for us to stay up to date with language because I'm actually listening to the performer Randy Rainbow's book. And as you know, those of you who followed Randy Rainbow and his funny videos, he is very progressive in many ways. He's a gay Jewish man. And apparently in 2020, some people found some tweets of his from years ago. And he used a word that starts with a T that was a not a very nice word for transgender folks. That was pretty commonly used back then and now is considered to be a pejorative. And so people found these tweets and were sharing them widely. I think it's really important for us to stay up to date because that word, think about all the words that we've used throughout the years to talk about Black people. For example, some words that we would never ever use now were standard language also used in the Black community many years ago. So we need to stay up to date and we need to be sensitive to what people in that community want us to, the words that they want us to use. Like the queer community, there's a lot of different phrases to describe gender expression. And I've heard people say, oh, I can't keep up with all the acronyms but honestly, if you are in one of those communities, like let's say you're asexual, which is one of the letters in the LGBTQIA+, if you're asexual and you hear LGBTQ, you're not going to feel represented. So I just want to remind people to stay up to date and do the research and understand what is sensitive and compassionate and inclusive, especially in the workplace, because you want people to have that sense of belonging. You want people to feel engaged at work.
Thank you for that. And I absolutely agree. So Cynthia has she, her. And so definitely pay attention to how people identify. And if you, oftentimes I kick off calls asking people, how do they pronounce their names and how do they identify? And that way I know I'm also the Southerner that still says y'all, which is singular and plural, and all y'all, which is plural. And so, but it's like, well, I don't like y'all. And that's my assumption, right? They may not like y'all because again, is not how they identify. So I make assumptions, but I generally try to ask because y'all may not be in agreement with that person or them. And so it's really important that you understand that and you ask people. And don't be afraid to ask because most people are taken aback like, wow, thank you for asking. And it's really important to think about the things that you can do on an individual level to be inclusive in how you communicate as well, because you want to be included as well. So we're wrapping this up. So I want to get some final thoughts. I'll go with Cynthia to see what are your final thoughts and anything that you think people should really think about and focus on when it comes to inclusive communication.
Well, I think a lot of people are under the perception that they may need to be in a leadership position to start doing things differently, when it really does start at the individual level. And for any of the leaders out there, sales leaders, yes, I work in sales, but any leaders out there, that it starts with a culture of transparency and creating a safe space for people to have conversations around this. No one is going to feel like they want to interrupt or correct somebody if they're going to be ostracized or reprimanded afterwards. So it starts with providing that safe space for people to have open dialogue.
Michelle, you're on mute.
Sorry. Any final thoughts, Marie, on that you would like to leave with the audience?
Yeah, I totally echo what Cynthia says, creating a safe space for people to have these discussions. And two other things, if you make a mistake, I interviewed a trans person on my podcast, and they were really excellent in explaining that, don't beat yourself up. If you make a mistake on pronouns, don't like hit it over the head and go on and on about how horrible you feel. Just apologize. Say, hey, I didn't know that. Thank you so much for letting me know that, and I'm going to change it from now on. So it's really important to apologize, recognize the error that you made, not put the onus on the offended party by saying you're too sensitive or I had good intent, all that. Take responsibility and just give a simple apology and say you're going to change.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. So, Cynthia, how can people connect with you? How can they reach out to you?
The best way is probably through LinkedIn. I'm there all the time. That's the best way, just to message me through LinkedIn.
Salespeople, they're always on LinkedIn. I just want to point that out. How about you, Marie? How can people reach out to you?
I'm on LinkedIn a lot too. I also have a website, www.fertilegroundcommunications.com. I'm also on Facebook, and my email is marie@fertilegroundcommunications.com.
Thank you both for joining me today, everybody. I hope this was helpful. If nothing else, you have some actionable steps you can take to have inclusive communication in the workplace, at home, and out in the world. Everybody have a great week, and I will be back in June with another great group of guests having conversations about the equity pursuit. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Michelle.